For this next art project, we are going to be inspired by our current season, which is fall, or we sometimes call autumn. And it's one of the most inspirational times for artists because of all the colors that are changing around us. We can't help but notice how the leaves are changing to beautiful reds and oranges and yellows and sometimes browns, and they're falling down around us. And so a lot of artists are inspired by this season. And this artist we're going to be looking at today uses this as her initial inspiration, but she really loves abstract art. And you'll see when you look at her images that her trees that she creates are very unique, but not very realistic, more abstract. So we're going to begin by thinking about the shapes of the treetops that we want to include in our artwork. And they don't have to be realistic. I'm thinking of first round, but then I thought of almost like a leaf-shaped tree or a gumdrop-shaped tree or a semicircle. If we look at the artist as inspiration, she uses many unusual shapes for her treetops and then includes very interesting designs inside of those shapes. So first I want you to start sketching out or thinking about some ideas for different shapes that you might like to use for the tops of your trees. After we've decided the shapes, we're going to start towards the top of our paper. And next we're going to use our lightest fall color, which is yellow, to almost do like a scribble sketch of the shape of each treetop that you want to have in your composition. So obviously this first one's going to be more of an oval, and I'll go through and kind of quickly sketch with just my lightest color, kind of the outline first, and then filling it in with a light pressure of yellow only. If you're using marker, try to just use the tippy top of the marker and push lightly with that too. But if you're using crayon, you can control your pressure a bit better and do real light pressure so that we can barely see the beginnings of these trees, because we're going to be building up the color with other warm colors to really remind us of fall. In this next photo, you'll be able to see the other warm colors that I added on top of my yellow. Even though I'm doing this on my iPad, you're going to be working on paper for yours. I just thought it might be nice to be able to see the steps in a digital way as well. And if you really like this project, you could always do a second version on your iPad too. Your next step will be to think of some creative, interesting designs, maybe with simple lines or shapes or patterns, to add as a layer on top of your warm colored treetops. Now I'm going to show you a few of my different versions of this project that I've created. You can see me starting with yellow and building up other warm colors on top, creating the tree trunks and the intersecting curved lines that make it look like hills. Maybe one's further back, one's closer. For this one, I used marker for the ground, and I will show you a little bit later how I used some water with that marker to actually turn it into like a watercolor paint. This is another version I did, thinking a little bit more creatively about the shapes of the treetops. I was trying to be a little bit more creative this day. And for this one, I really tried to make each one quite different. You probably also noticed that I did a little bit more blending and a little bit more colors with the blending. So I really like the way that that turned out. And the designs on this one are my favorite. I also went through and I thickened up all the tree trunks to make them look a little fatter at the bottom and a little thinner at the top. You'll see me do that in a minute. And I was just really proud of the designs I came up with for this one. Another thing that I did to make this one even more interesting is I started thinking about the light source, like which way the sun was shining from and how high it might be in the sky. And as you can see, depending on where the sun would be, which is my flashlight on my phone, it changes the shape and direction of the shadow. So based on this, I thought about it in my landscape, and I added some shadows to the bottoms of the tree trunks to make them look like the light source was coming kind of from the bottom right. So you can see I made the shadows from the trees going in the opposite direction of where the sun would be shining from. So if the sun's shining from the bottom right, the shadows would be on the other side of the tree shining back the other way, because that's where the cast shadow would be. Next, after deciding to use some markers for the ground part of my landscape, I started shading in some colors. And even though this one was kind of running out of juice, it actually worked out okay because of the technique I used at the end to kind of finish it. Also, another thing to think about is when you're creating a landscape, if you want something to look further back, you can make it darker and it'll feel further away. So that's why I'm using that darker green, and you'll see me use a little bit of teal blue to mix in there as well to make that hill feel further away. And then I use some lighter color greens towards on the hills towards the right and left to make those feel closer to me. So that helps with creating that feeling of depth, like I could walk into my picture and keep going. This is what I was talking about earlier in the video of just using water and a paintbrush, or you could even use a cotton swab or Q-tip, and waking up water-based markers, which are just like Crayola markers. As long as they're not permanent markers, this works. And you can actually use them just like watercolor paint if you just use a wet paintbrush. And I even wash my brush in between different color sections to keep the colors clean. So you can use it and blend it just like you would watercolor paint, which is pretty awesome. And I think it gives the ground a really cool effect.